Shashank, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on your podcast, Ayush.
So, where is ChatGPT going? Is this a technology to pay attention to, or should we just be looking past it?
Well, it's a very pertinent question at this time. And the main reason being that ChatGPT, I think, is probably one of those technologies that has risen so fast into becoming, so commonly known, and everybody's talking about it, and everybody's wondering what it's, going to do in the future. That I think certainly it has significance. It is something to kind of think about. Although if you ask me as a practitioner, as somebody who's deep in the world of language models and AI and knowledge graphs and what have you, I think ChatGPT is just the tip of the iceberg, right? And so if you start thinking about ChatGPT, I think the reason it has caught the world's fancy, if you may, or gotten everybody hooked onto it because uh, it's very accessible, right? It is something that anybody without any prior technical knowledge or understanding of AI can easily interact with, can sort of ask questions and have fun with. So I think like that's the power of ChatGPT more than what it does, because certainly it has a lot of shortcomings as well, and it's not like the be all and all of the evolution of AI technology either. So none of those are true, but I think it is certainly true that it's very user friendly, right? And
Mhm.
so I think there's something to learn from it. Um, I do feel like it has paved the way for two things. It has paved the way, one, for, of course, generation of more user-friendly, consumer-facing technologies in the world of AI to come through. I think that is certainly going to happen. Once the bar is raised, it never gets lowered, right? People get used to a certain, level of comfort or certain level of interactivity, and I think that's never going back. And we've seen that, right? Like we've seen that with the internet, we saw that with mobile, we saw that with multiple other technologies. I think in that sense, ChatGPT is going to stay here in terms of having its mark in the sector. Having said that, though, I think like there is a lot more happening, right? And there is going to be a lot more of innovation you're going to see around a true intelligent machine. Right now, there has been talk about this, in terms of general intelligence and how it's going to play with our human existence and whether it'll be good for us or bad for us, and how we're going to harness the power of that particular, technology as and when it becomes available. But I think that's the direction we're headed in, and you'll see a lot more come through, right? A lot more come through in various ways. More powerful thinking machines, different kinds of ways that we'll be able to interact with it. It will basically become all pervasive, I think, eventually, in every walk of life.
So, in regards to ChatGPT basically being in its infancy, do we start thinking about AI ethics and maybe AI rights now, or should we leave that for a later discussion?
It's a fantastic question, and I think it boils down to a fundamental societal dialogue, I guess, that we all indulge in from time to time. Is that should you go and influence something at the formation stages just so that you don't let it go in the wrong direction? Or do you let it evolve to a point where at least you're able to understand and grok it, right? Understand to figure out, how complex is this and how bad can it get for us? And then should you jump in and course correct and, formulate something around it? I think it's the same debate, if you ask me, in the world of AI. And I would just, again, as someone sort of living that world or, being deep in it, I would say I think a tempered approach somewhere in the middle is perhaps right for us today. We certainly can't ignore it. Ignoring it would be, wouldn't be very prudent, because I think we need to keep an eye out for it. There is already impact of, sort of the negative energy that AI could generate, from whether it's deep fakes to trust to, just hallucination and various other factors, which is impacting us tangibly today. So, even if that's not the most harmful thing possible, it's certainly out there, and it's certainly already sort of playing a role. So I think we got to go and at least have a position on it, and start doing something about it. So I think certainly there is that element. But having said that, the flip side is that let it evolve, let it become and get to a point where the technology has a little more color. It has taken various different shapes, and then we would be able to understand the complexity and perhaps either regulate it or as a societal norm set some guidelines, which would then be more pertinent, because we might create some laws, we might create some guardrails that actually might be irrelevant, depending on where the technology heads in the next 3 4 5 years.
So who should be setting these guidelines? Is it governmental regulation, which people are not really fond of? Is it a handful of corporations like Amazon, Apple, Meta, Alphabet? Is it and Microsoft? Is it something that we should have a discussion with in a decentralized fashion? Like, should we be casting votes on the blockchain? How should we really start talking about if we even should regulating AI?
Yeah, very thought-provoking, Ayush. In my opinion, I'm a very bottoms-up, we the people type of a person. So, in that, sort of in that spirit of give the power to the people, I would say I think the more decentralized, the more bottoms up, let the people decide for themselves what is right for them is perhaps the approach I would lean on. Of course, it can be implemented in various ways. It could show up on the regular ballot, or perhaps a more decentralized technology could help power that. So there's also an element of anonymity and other things that could be maintained, or some other version of it, whichever way we kind of, go through that motion. But I do feel that I think it's the people that need to decide. It's the classic democratic process that we should follow for this as well, because ultimately the people, the ones who would get impacted would be the people, right? And so I feel like I think the ones who would get impacted should have the right, should have the say to formulate, how they want to deal with it. Now, of course, as we know that whenever we go down that path, it can get chaotic, right? Like that's the kind of the two sides of the democratic coin, if you may, right? Like on one side you have the power, it's the people who kind of figure out for themselves what's right for them, but then the flip side is, well, the decisions may not be very cleanly done, it may not happen quickly, we might go through a period of chaos where most of us wouldn't agree with each other on what really is right and what really is wrong, and it could lead to a period of confusion, right? But I do feel that I think we should probably go through that motion and go through the period of confusion to come out of it as a society more aware, more sort of prudent, um, more understanding of what the ramifications are, so that then we can make our choices.
I 100% agree. We need those societal stretch marks to showcase that we did it, that we had those discussions. It is also interesting that we're having a bunch of elections next year, and particularly in the United States, I'm loosely following it, and we've seen no politician talk about artificial intelligence. Even as the hype is highest, no one is discussing it. It's all just core political issues, which I'm not interested in discussing. But one of the things we talked about before is that when the mainstream understanding is lowest, the hype is highest. So you have this inverse proportionality. So
Indeed.
con- considering the mainstream understanding is lowest, what crucial aspects of artificial intelligence are we missing in your opinion or in general?
Yeah, no, actually, the point you're making in terms of, hype and deep understanding being sort of inversely proportional, one goes up, the other was right at the bottom, and vice versa. Well, that's true, right? Like that's true of everything. Everyone's very enamored with wanting to go to Mars, as an example, a very orthogonal example, but most don't understand what it means, what it's going to take, right? And so, same thing is with AI. Everyone's either very hyped up about it and thinking, hey, this is going to change the world, and I'm going to somehow become a 2.0 of myself in a few years because AI is going to make that happen. And then there is a half the world that's thinking, oh, this AI is the next Terminator in town, and that's gonna just take over our society, right? So it's the two extreme ends, and the hype on both sides is very high, for sure. I would absolutely agree, but I think few are digging in, beyond the sort of surface level understanding to see where is it really, what is the phase of the technology, how far can it go, what are the limitations, what is the power. Of course, there's a little bit of truth on both sides, little bit, but I'm saying that I think that there is a lot more in terms of, deeper understanding. Now, the way I have seen this evolve, and this is again my worldview of living in Silicon Valley, have seen a lot of these technologies kind of come through in their own waves from time to time. I do feel like I think it will go through its norming forming process. So what's really going to happen is there will be a ton of hype. Everyone will just kind of bet everything on it. Eventually, I think we might see, yeah, we might see some of that dying down, primarily because you've, over-indexed on it. You've just gone, too far deeper into its promise without understanding the ramifications. And so, you might feel disillusioned, which is often happens, right? At least for a percentage of people, they may feel like, hey, it didn't come through, it didn't happen. I was waiting for this and it didn't really happen. But in reality, I do think that the progress would be tangible as it is happening even today, right? On a day-to-day basis, we're seeing a lot of very good, tangible sort of things come through in the world of AI. And I think that a lot more will happen, and a lot more will happen at an accelerated pace. Now, eventually, what would happen is it's almost like there's a seesaw or the yin yang, if you may, where the hype is going to temper down, and then the understanding is going to go up. Not saying that everyone in this universe will understand everything equally, but at least at least that would sort of balance itself out. And then we will start having a slightly different conversation where we will now, with more awareness, more understanding, would be able to now piece the things together and say, well, what can this really do for me? And for us as society, and where is it that I don't think we are ready to even take advantage of it, because the technology is not matured, or it's not possible, or we need to go through our next quantum jump or iteration before we can get to that point, right? Like whatever the underlying case may be. I think that's a few years out though, Ayush. I don't think
Mm.
we're anywhere close to it. I
Are
do feel
you
like I think the hype is going to stay there for a bit.
really? And are you worried about the hype dying down to a point where we could have another AI winter? Because it seems like every single time that AI has been talked about in this grandiose, we're having congressional hearings, we're seeing massive companies pour in billions of dollars. But obviously this in these instances hasn't happened before, but symbolic AI, expert systems, these hype cycles have happened before. And when the hype inevitably dies down because all the promises were not delivered, we get the AI winter and investment just immediately or gradually stops. So are you worried about this, or do you see some unprecedented things that have happened that will negate these?
Yeah, I think that there is an interesting question that you raise here, which is around, the AI winter, and then of course, the hype leading to sort of leading to disillusionment, which we have seen happen with AI itself, like not even a different technology, right? It's gone through its motions. And yes, there were periods when it did seem like it was all coming through, and you're right, you listed out a few, and then it somehow sort of went through that sort of down phase, and the deep winter, right? And then it had to kind of be revived, right, in its sort of next evolution or next avatar. This time, though, I think that there are a couple of factors which are slightly different. I feel this time. No, not to guarantee that the winter isn't possible, or not to say that we may not go through the same unfortunate experience again. Like it's possible. All of that are definitely there. Um, and I'm a probabilistic thinker, by the way, just being a mathematician by training. That in the realm of possibilities, everything is out there, right? It's a matter of how high is the probability attached with that possibility, and should we take it very seriously, or should we wait on it to evolve, right? So like that's the way I kind of put in my mental model. But having said that, I think this time there are two or three things which are substantially different, and those are, firstly, I think that now the common public is getting involved a lot more than they had gotten involved with the AI evolution in the past. I think if you really think about it, the past generations of AI was largely restricted to a lot of deep technology folks and developers and creatives, and those who are at the leading edge and bleeding edge of technology, right? So those were the ones who were sort of living, breathing AI. They were talking AI. They were getting excited about it. But the common person, like for example, the person who works in retail, or the person who's flipping burgers, wasn't really that worried about AI. It was a word too far from their daily lives. They just weren't really concerned about it. It wasn't real. It wasn't tangible. The only thing that they felt and thought of AI was probably seen from a Hollywood movie, right? And it ended right there. They couldn't like internalize it, or think through it of what it means, how they could take advantage of it. I think there you have to give credit that I think the newer generation, and especially ChatGPT, for better or for worse, has made it very accessible. So now more and more people are talking about it, more and more people are playing with it. And then of course not only ChatGPT, but I would also mention even all these image creation things, for example, Mid Journeys of the world and others, because it's fun, right? So people don't do it for the sake of AI, they do it because it's fun. They're giving prompts and things are getting generated. So, oh, that's cool, okay, it's almost like a game, right? So So many of these newer AI technologies, and there are many more now, one emerging, I guess, every hour, so pretty much, right? Like there's been
Yeah.
like a lot of vibrant growth going on. So I think that is going to consume the people, right? And so whenever people get involved, and I think also, of course, corporates, because there are two layers of it. One is, of course, individuals on the street, and then of course business use cases and corporates and corporate decision makers. We will see this wave will actually have a lot of tangible use cases. So that's one thing I think that certainly will be different from prior ones. Prior ones was more theoretical, a little more contained. This time I think you're going to see more broader use cases and applications, right? Not everything is going to stick, not everything is going to be successful, but you'll see many of them start clicking and many of them giving tangible value. And so then of course, people are going to invest more, and it'll feel more real, right? As opposed to a more theoretical possibility. The second part of this also is the fact that this wave of technology, this wave of basically language models driven LLMs, like that's essentially the current AI, if you may, at a broader level, generative AI, as we are all calling it today. That is creating some possibilities that in some sense I think is allowing us to dream bigger and think of even more applications. Because if you look at the prior versions, a lot of it was about, knowledge mapping, finding patterns, right? Like it was a lot of those kinds of use cases. Not to say those are not important, but a lot of those were very contained, limited, and in some sense, you had to have a lot of prerequisites to even take advantage of those technologies, right? Like do a lot of pre-work, get the right kind of data sets, train it, label it, what have you, right? Like that was the prior generation of AI. Today's AI, the generative AI, especially when we talk about text-based generative AI, which is basically the language models or LLMs, or you have the image-based AI, image-based generative AI, where we're having fun creating all these, interesting paintings and drawings and renderings out of, simple text prompts, for example, and many more. I think these are leading to a lot of new types of possibilities, right? Like that technology can be applied in multiple different ways. For example, like what we are trying to do ourselves is we try to take that into a domain which is very business centric, like cybersecurity as an example, right? And so I'm sure that originally when folks were building Gen AI technology, I don't think they were conceiving that we'd go apply it to say something like cyber, right? Or for that matter, marketing slogan generation or data cleaning or what have you, right? Like many other use cases that are emerging. And so I think like that's the difference this time, where you will see that the technology has certain foundational benefits, which I think will maybe I think just enable evolution a little faster and let it go in various directions.
One thing about ChatGPT for Gen Z that has spawned is an over exaggeration of understanding for Gen Z. I forget the site where I saw this statistic, but it was about 45% of Gen Z surveyed exaggerate their understanding of AI for some particular reason. And it seems like Gen Z is very interested in AI, in particular products like ChatGPT, but they're not understanding it. And folks like you are, giving more accessible information, which is fantastic. It's exactly what the world needs. And in fact, I had a question on Instagram where Gen Z was asking, I'm wondering, we're always talking about the negative aspects of AI, but how can Gen Z benefit from AI? How can Gen Z benefit from products like ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, there are two different parts of this question that you're sort
Mm,
of, putting forth. One is, of course, Gen Z itself, right? Like there
sure.
are some things that this generation, the younger folks out there are getting exposed to that I think we as society haven't been exposed to in the past. So, in some
Mhm.
sense, they are special. Um, we all were special, I guess, in some way as the technology was evolving, but right now a lot of things have coming together, all at once. So certainly, I think there is one aspect of that, just being a Gen Z and being in this time and age, right, has certain impact in the way you perceive the world, the way you understand things, the way you try to take advantage of it. And it has its both good and bad. And the second part, as you rightly put, is like, where can they step in and take advantage of AI, or, what role can they play? So let me answer the second one first. I think that might be a better
Sure.
way of looking at it. I do feel that I think there is a big part for Gen Z to play in AI. And the reason being simply that I think they are going to be the AI generation. They are the ones who will grow up into, really taking advantage of all the AI that is being built out today, because we are still in the early innings. Things will evolve a lot more over the next few years, and you'll start seeing AI seeping in everywhere, right? In a way that how internet has seeped in pretty much everywhere. right? And so, and it's only seeping in more and more, right? But 20 years back, 30 years back, if you ask somebody, that generation, it's like, hey, what do you think of internet? They was, it's kind of like a toy. I don't even know if it has real use cases, right? Like today, I think you cannot live without the internet, right? So I think that's where we have come. Now, the same thing would happen with AI. AI is going to become baked into all kinds of day-to-day things that we use into just broader sort of, business applications to personal things. We'll have perhaps co-pilots and assistants and all other, flavors and ways that AI would influence our lives every day. So, it will influence our choices. It'll help us make decisions. It'll help us sift through, lots of information. They would essentially have a lot of different shapes, forms, sizes, right? And so I think the Gen Z or this generation and beyond is the one that would completely be soaked into it. They are the ones who would experience it. They will see the rise of it. They'll see the emergence of applications. They would certainly see how this truly becomes part of society, right? And so I feel like in that spirit and in that light, Gen Z certainly in some sense should get involved with this sooner rather than later, because I think it's very pertinent for them. It's going to impact their lives, so I think it's important. And I also feel that I think for this generation, generally for youth at large, that's how I look at it, or for anybody, as a human at large, I think it's important to look at the positive energy more than necessarily worry about the negative energy. And what I mean by that is, yes, there are negative impacts. Yes, this could adversely impact us. Yes, they could have a lot of these, pieces of the puzzle that we may not like as a society. But, we got to figure out a way to manage it. We got to figure out a way to contain it. We got to figure out a way to kind of, flip the story and, use it to our advantage, right? Like make sure that we use the, harness the creative power, harness the intelligence, harness the kind of language understanding, harness the all other potential that, sort of AI will make possible, right? And so I think, like, yes, I would encourage Gen Z to kind of look at it from that light. um, Now flipping back to your first question, or kind of moving to it, segueing to it, you mentioned that I think there is a little bit of a lack of deeper understanding. I think that's a function of, again, a couple of things. One, of course, is a lot of the younger folks consume information from social media as opposed to structured information. And that's just how the world has become. In fact, I wouldn't even say the younger folks. I think the world has begun to consume information like that, right? Every age. They are looking at small tweets, and they're looking at, small posts from somebody else, or a video, or, that's how they're learning about things in the world today. Um, that again has like both sides of the puzzle. Sometimes that's too obviously you cannot, pack in a lot of good content in a 30-second video, or, even a 5-minute video for that matter, right? And so I think the knowledge by design at some level is very superficial. And then, of course, some would sort of peel the onion, if you may. Some would get intrigued, excited, and then would go searching and find that more relevant content and go deeper. But most people don't do that, right? Like most just take the understanding at that level and say, yeah, well, this is what it is, right? And so I think that is what leads to um, misunderstanding of how much you know, right? Because you feel like the person who put out the video, or the expert who wrote the content say so, and they've already distilled it down in those 10 sentences or 2 words or 30-second video, and that's the gist of it, and I got the gist of it, so I know everything, so so therefore I have a deep understanding, right? So there's that kind of a transitive relationship that I guess most people in today's world use, right? Which is how the world is, right? For better or for worse. So again, kind of going back to it, so I do feel that I think there's a case, and I would really encourage every young person out there, every Gen Z, that, dig a little deeper, have fun with it. It's very important to learn. The more you will learn, the more fun you can have with it, the more understanding you will have, the more excellent things you can do with it. And, going back to my point earlier that I was making, you are the generation that's going to get most impacted with this technology. You might as well know how to harness it, to your advantage, and to the benefit of larger society.
It's interesting that you call Gen Z the AI generation, and then you just said that Gen Z is the generation that will be most impacted by AI. Because my next question, just stemming from this, is they may benefit from AI or find ways to benefit from AI, but it seems like they are going in a collision course with automation. And that's one thing that I am particularly afraid of, to use a very serious word, because it doesn't seem like they are prepared to handle, what they're going to post-secondary for instance. Their entire careers being displaced by artificial intelligence. So is this something that we should be worried about? Is it something that maybe we should keep in the back of our minds? What are your thoughts on automation for Gen Z?
It's a great question, and it's a difficult one to answer honestly, because I think the dichotomy is that today's generation, again, Gen Z, the AI generation, is doing what it knows best, right? It's not like they're trying to, self-destruct or get themselves into a position that would, put them in a place of disadvantage in the future. I don't think that anybody's really thinking like that. What they are thinking is like, hey, there are these kinds of roles, jobs, training sets that give me a job today, that enable me today, and I should double down and do those things more, right? Um, so I think like that's probably, in my understanding, the motivation for a lot of this understanding, for a lot of these choices that Gen Z is making, and also for a lot of these, sort of broader, I would say, mental models that that is governing their decision making. However, I think the important piece, which would happen, I have a feeling, naturally as well, we all, as we see more of life, I think we tend to kind of transform our understanding and mental models, and I lean in on the more positive, energizing bits rather than the ones that bring us down. So as people look at all the exciting things in life and learn about various things, I do feel that I think there'll be an important part, that realization which is going to come through to many of these folks who are, in some sense, like you said, in a collision course, if you may, with where we are headed. That I think it's important to rethink of the skills, rethink of where they should focus, right? And I think like it's good if they can proactively kind of bring that up and start doing something, so that they don't have to wait until they're pressured to or forced to do it. It's always nicer that you can do it on your own terms. Um, but I think that eventually, one way or the other, it's going to happen. Either they'll be forced or they will, pick that option. And in both those cases, my sense is that I think what is going to happen is it's not a binary choice of either you are, pro a certain automation or opposed to it. What would end up happening is that you would find the right balance. And what I mean by that is I think there'll be certain types of jobs, certain types of tasks, certain types of human activity that would be best done through automation. And in fact, what I would call is like, I'm going to call it creative automation, because,
Mm.
automation as we know it was mundane tasks being repetitive and, kind of like the second generation of industrial revolution, if you may, right? Like that was the standard automation. The new world automation has thinking involved in it, right? It's a smart automation, which is where AI will come in and start making decisions around things that that aren't very complex to start with, right? And so humans don't need to do those kinds of things, right? And so, for example, certain sets of jobs would get, perhaps either eradicated or get redefined. You would start seeing certain kinds of processes where it would make no sense for humans to waste their time, energy, money. It would be better off handed over to an AI agent, or, to some sort of a creative automation platform that would actually end up doing that work, right? And so I do feel like that's going to happen. That's just a natural evolution of where that, piece would go. But the other side of the story, if you think about it, would be that you have to harness and you have to learn some of these, what I would call is the more human type of advantages. So if you start looking at a human type advantage, you would start seeing things that only people can do. Where there is an aspect of you know emotional well-being that is involved, but there's an aspect of human thinking and creativity that the AI engine or platform is unable to achieve or has difficulty doing, right? So now you're thinking more in terms of the more human aspects of work, and I think those human aspects of work will still have a lot of value. In fact, in a very sort of weird way, and I enjoy reading science fiction, so it just reminds me of this very old book that was written back, almost a generation or two back, which also inspired a bunch of Hollywood movies. This whole "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" That was a particular book
Oh.
that was written a while back, by Philip K. Dick, that led to the movie Blade Runner, right? Like, and that became a very incredibly popular Hollywood movie. And if you go back to that movie, the theme of that movie, if you think about it, has a very weird connotation, which I'm sure, like through ages, people felt like this guy was probably smoking and thinking in some weird ways. But the idea was, it's very interesting, where he says, hey, all these pets would become artificial intelligent pets. Okay, these are all smart things. So then the value for a real goat or a real dog is very high. And so people pay premium to get something that is actually real.
Hmm.
as opposed to, something that feels real and almost behaves real, but is actually artificial. It's a human created robotic pet, right? And there is a little bit of that, sort of enmeshed in the story. And I feel like some of that is sort of going to play out in the future, which is, I think we would be able to discern in a way things that are very human, that are human generated. And I think there'll be premium for it in some form, right? Like the human energy, the human creativity, the human type of skills. And then, of course, everything else would, perhaps get automated out, right, in a way.
100% agree. I had so many conversations with my father and my partner where we were just kind of imagining a world where everything is basically robot driven and robot led, and you actually pay, a markup for human services. So when you go to a restaurant, it's like robots delivering it, robots cooking it, but then you pay a little extra, and then, oh, it's a human waiter or waitress now. And
Right.
that's such a strange dichotomy because we don't even think like the robots are the novelty right now, but
Indeed.
a couple of decades in the future, the robots could just be the ubiquitous facet of society, and we would want to. Oh my God, I'm so tired of the robots. Just give me a human. I want to talk to a
Right.
human. And in fact, we are already seeing inklings of this because when we call customer service reps, most of us don't want to talk to the robot. We actually
Indeed.
we actually want to talk to the human. And I know some people may say because the robots or the bots are not as capable, but there is something about having a human there that just makes it better. Like even online, you don't want to talk to the bot, you want to talk to the human. You want the human connection, if you will, which is very interesting. So
Indeed.
offline, we talked about two or three pillars of artificial intelligence. What are those pillars and what are their significances?
Yeah, I think if you start thinking about artificial intelligence and just broader way in terms of what this technology or what this the promise is leading to, I think the first is, of course, if you think about it, is the ability to reason, the ability to think, right? Because again, the whole world, in some sense, is derived from that, right? Like if you start thinking about why artificial intelligence, if you just parse that phrase, well, what we have been conceiving for years now, or trying to conceive for years, is a way that we can encapsulate intelligence in a machine. Right, like that's essentially kind of the underlying driving factor there, right? And so I think that what does that really mean, right? Like, what does intelligence mean? So intelligence can be thought of course, at various layers. Ability to think, ability to discern, ability to maybe even feel is intelligence, for that matter, right? Like there are various ways that you can understand and build. I would say mental models around intelligence. And I think that is foundationally going to be one important pillar of that. How close do we get to it?
Hmm.
Right? Which, in other words, very simple words, means that, is this just an intelligible machine, in the sense that something that sounds intelligent, but actually does not have its own thinking ability, decision making ability, discerning ability? Or is this a technology that is going to end up going in the direction of being more human like, right? Where you have some sort of a brain powering that ability to think through and sense and make decisions, right? And so I think like that's one big piece of this puzzle within the AI world, which I think is very important, and something to keep an eye out for and then understand how it evolves. So that's one humongous piece. The other part, I think, which is more in terms of how it gets consumed. So today, if you start thinking about artificial intelligence, at least in the current generation one, very inspired by ChatGPT, somehow we have come to misunderstand, I would say, that artificial intelligence needs to have a very a human-like, a human rather, on the other side of the wire, type of an experience, right? And so, what we are seeing is the emergence of these bots and agents. In fact, I would say, in a funny way, we have um, sort of equated bots as as the only way to interact with AI, right? We've said, hey, there's a bot there, and that the bot on the other side has a chat interface, and you talk to a particular an artificial intelligence agent, and that's how artificial intelligence behaves, acts, provides us value. However, if you really start thinking a little deeper into it, that's not how we normally operate in our life. So you don't keep talking to people all day long, right? Like we interact with people, we talk to them, but we also do other things with them, right? Like in the sense that we have our isolation moments when we do our own things, then we go and interact with them in other ways. Like, we play a game with them, we work with them, we stand next to them, and sometimes we make an eye contact, and we have a non-verbal dialogue with them, if you may, right? And so there are various ways that we as humans interact with other humans, other things, other living beings, and sort of go about our daily lives, right? And so I think that hasn't happened in the AI world. Somehow I think we have just transformed everything into a chat-based interface. I do feel like that second pillar is also going to see some rapid evolution. In fact, my bet is that the way where AI would head is, on the first one, AI is going to become smarter. It'll certainly, incrementally, but certainly over a period of time, will pick up a lot of discerning abilities, a lot of things that even if it's not 100% will look like a knowledgeable, existence, right? So I think that that would certainly happen. And on the other front, I think it will become a little bit more, I would say, opaque in a way, and in a way that it would just seep in into every part of our life. I don't think we'll be sitting with chatbots all day long and talking to chatbots and asking questions, but it will just be enmeshed with everything else that we do, right? So for example, we drive the car, we'll get some suggestions in it, or the car itself will behave in a certain way. That would be the AI, if you may, right? The machine. We our bags and computers and mugs, for all and the systems that we interact with. Today, we might be spending a lot of time where we end up, doing a lot of, for example, business to business type of transactions where we are reconciling things, we are, looking through stuff. We'll probably stop doing all of those. The agent will do it for us and kind of present it to us, and we'll consume it and start from there, right? So things like those, the kind of the headless nature of AI, if you may, all pervasive, sitting somewhere, enmeshed in our daily lives across things, but not really visible like a chatbot. You're not going to be talking to it all day long, right? For sure. So I think like those are the two fundamental pillars: how we experience, like how we interact with artificial intelligence, and how we evolve it in that direction. And then of course the first part is, uh, you know, how smart does it get, and how soon does it get that smart that it's supposed to get?
So, when you're talking about AI being enmeshed in our daily lives and out in all our technologies and appliances, we're kind of talking about IoT, but for AI.
I think it's everything. So yes, there will
Mhm.
be IoT, type of stuff that would happen. There would also be like, what we think of today as the internet, right? The
Mhm.
applications that we interact with, they will all have an element of AI in them. There would also be aspects of our other walks of life, right? So not just IoT. I think IoT is easier to conceive for sure. And yes, I think the 20-year-old promise of, yes, you'll have a smart fridge that will kind of replenish itself might
Yeah.
actually come true.
Yeah.
We don't know that yet, but possibly might come true as more and more of these things, supply chains get more streamlined, and AI starts making decisions. But I think the bigger part that we'll see even more than that would be in terms of our day-to-day activities, right? So for example, like when you go and order food online, as an example, right? You probably do it today using an app, right? And so it's already getting smarter to an extent where it can make suggestions, it can tell you things, it can find out where you are. That might even become the next step where you maybe don't even have to log in into an app, right? Like you would probably just show an intent that you are hungry, and it knows what you need and what hour is it, and that agent would decipher all of those and order for you. It's almost like having a personal butler, if you may, right? Like who's
Mhm.
gone and figured out what you need and brings that stuff for you. So these kinds of things would be far easier to get to because the technology will start enabling some of those. And that's just one example. Similarly, in a business to business case, there are a ton of those examples. Um, where you spend a lot of time generating reports, doing reconciliations, meeting with people to decide on some small, little pieces of tasks, triaging, prioritizing, right? Like we do so much of time, energy gets spent in that. I think all of that would definitely get automated out with AI for sure. And then the bigger pieces that'll happen in consumer, more than the fridges of the world, more than these, would perhaps be things like cars and also industrial machinery, right? You'll start seeing, things, and already some of that has been automated out a whole lot, which I think people haven't realized. For example, I'll just give you one small orthogonal example: elevator technology. Nobody thinks elevator technology is hip. I think I can guarantee you that, right? But but elevator technology has come a very long way in the last 50, 70 years,
Sure.
right? It has gone from that mundane crank driven, and it
Yeah.
used to go up and down, to now where it is a fairly smart elevated technology. It can figure out the weights, it can figure out, the directionality of where people are headed. It can do a bunch of other things today, and especially as buildings are getting more complex. I think, that technology is kind of keeping pace with it, right? Now, again, that is nothing to do with AI here, but I'm just saying like AI would start coming in like that. It'll be a little bit more invisible in many cases.
Hmm.
Your car will get smarter, your office doors might get smarter, like things like those, but you will not feel it the same way that that, again, going back to it, Hollywood projects, if you may, or how we have come to believe from sci-fi.
Yeah, it's not really sexy to make a Hollywood movie about AI in office stores, but that's the most important thing that people would care about is, the door opening as we're walking through it rather than like standing it, waiting for it to open. And then it's like we want a more seamless lifestyle and we can use artificial intelligence to get there. So, one missing piece, I think, is cybersecurity. I don't think that people are really cognizant of how vulnerable they are, how much information they're putting out online. And with the surge of AI, it seems like, you know, cybersecurity is the thing to talk about, is the thing to kind of make priority one. So, what are your thoughts on cybersecurity in the 21st century? Maybe in 2023 is a more narrow question. How should we be thinking about it? And what are the pros and cons for AI in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'm very glad that you brought that up, again, because some of these are a little more behind the scenes. So, it's not always front and center for many people unless you are in, living and breathing that world. Um, I do feel that digital resilience at large, which includes, cybersecurity as a very important piece of that puzzle, and then of course availability of the system, right? Like the system needs to be available. Like, downtimes are unbearable now. You would just not be able to function if a certain system becomes offline or doesn't work, right? Which, of course, a cyber attack could also lead to it. But I'm saying both parts of this resilience, the security, the privacy aspects on one side, and then of course the availability and scalability on the other, I do feel are like fundamental to our modern existence. We are already feeling that even in the current age, even forget even the evolution of AI, but even the current age with everything being online, all our information being online, all our interaction being online. We don't walk into a bank anymore. We bank from our phones. We order our food from our phones. We open our cars using smart sort of locks, again sometimes from our phones. We all are transactions, from stock market to commercial transactions, are all electronic. Nobody's doing an open outcry out there sitting on the street and bidding for things. All our commerce is like that, as we very well know. Even the Amazons of the world have essentially sort of um, taken away even mom and pop stores, right? And so all our behavior has gone online, which also means all our data is online, all our transactions are online, all our interactions are online. So already I think we have come to a point where cyber has become more important than ever before, because our identities, our privacy, our security, everything depends on it, right? That gets compromised, we are in trouble, right? And we've seen that pan out multiple times, right? Like hacks, unauthorized access, data breaches. These are actually very expensive, not only for the companies that are doing it because they have liability, very expensive for human beings because their life gets disrupted, and they've got to then piece things together back for themselves. So it's actually a very complex problem, and it's in some sense very difficult one today. And the difficult one because yes, there are solutions for it. Yes, for example, we ourselves at Uno are the kinds of companies that help defend against it, and use AI in fact to our advantage. But I think like those problems are real and those problems are growing right now. If you go to the realm of artificial intelligence, I think the problem only gets multiplied, in a way. And what I mean by multiplication is, if you start looking at current generation systems, there is still an element of decipherability and explainability. You can go and figure out where your data is. You can, at least have certain checks and balances, some good hygiene around, how to protect it, how to encrypt it, how to, make sure that they have the correct permissions and access controls and so on and so forth. Not easy, but doable, at least like, those are the pieces of the puzzle that you play with today. Once you go into the world of AI, a lot of this data, really by design, even the current generation AI, gets all enmeshed. It all becomes part of this big whole large ocean. right? And so I draw this analogy. I was talking about this the other day that, when you start thinking about the new AI platforms and engines, the best way to kind of think about this is you took like a glass of water, you walked into the Pacific Ocean and you put that glass of water in the Pacific Ocean. And now you're trying to figure out, hey, where's my water in this Pacific Ocean?
Mm.
Right. And there's no way of figuring out your water doesn't have any identity anymore. It's all mixed in with that large block of water, the sort of infinite looking ever expanding block of water. And that's exactly how AI data sets and, AI pieces are. They all just get, put in everywhere in every nook and corner. They get used in multiple ways. They get abstracted out in certain ways. They become part of the whole sort of neural network connections, if you may, and other kinds of technologies. And it's very difficult to even unwind it. So even if you wanted to unwind it or figure out, which part of the piece may have gone into the wrong hands or, is getting abused, it's not that easy to even track it down and, kind of clamp down on it. It's not that straightforward. It's not like, hey, here is a database record or, here is a particular piece that you can go and clean up, right? And so I think like that's the reality that we live in. Um, and certainly, I think in that world there is a lot to worry about, and there's a lot to proactively build even today, right? Just so that we're not caught on the wrong side of the puzzle. Now, added to that, there is a second complexity that we are living with, which is that by design, AI is supposed to be smart and generative, right? Like that's what we're talking about all day long, right? Generative AI, which means that given its ability to sometimes make up facts, right, and given its ability to mutate reality, you are going to see a lot of trust issues also go side by side with security issues and privacy issues, right? And so um, there would be all those issues which you're already talking about, the deep fakes type of issues, right? Like
Yeah.
that we are already speaking of, and deep fakes are becoming again, kind of troublesome. But I think the bigger problem would be if you fast forward another 10 years, 15 years, there will be more generated data than real data, right? So then the question is, it will become impossible to figure out truth from fake because you don't know, if 80% of your data is generated data, I'm not saying all of it is going to be fake and irrelevant, but, if 80% is generated data, the lineage and provenance of that data set and how it came about and why it is the way it is would become actually a very difficult question to answer. It's not going to be that straightforward of, yeah, I read this in, Wall Street Journal and that's why it is what it is.
Mm.
Because it won't be the Wall Street Journal. It'll be some generated data set that would have um, gone through its different sort of iterations, and you're seeing some outcome and some output of that, right? So that's another part of the trust, the generated pieces, and then of course the fakes that are causing another level of problem, right? And then last but not the least, I think there is of course security, but there's a third aspect, kind of a offshoot of that, if you may, but has its own flavor, is privacy.
Mhm.
Because I think with all anyway, I think privacy in the current generation, and again going back to a Gen Z pics that you put up, there is just so much of personal online content that is being thrown out in the internet to start with, that by itself is a menace, right? Like, and many of them are not realizing it today, but their whole lives are out there on the internet, right? And so that by itself can become troublesome, because now you add to that the ability for AI to take advantage of it, or kind of mutate it. You're living with a sort of a double trouble, if you may, right? One is you've got your entire life out there, so your privacy can get compromised, your security can get compromised, and then it can get mutated. An alternate reality can be created out of your existence, and at some point in time that could create a huge bunch of its own problems, right? Like you would start seeing a different kind of an issue, right? Um a very sort of a, I would say, a metaphorical cloning of yourself out there in the
Yeah.
internet, right? If you
Yeah.
may.
No, the state of AI for Gen Z just feels very peculiar. But it's not supposed to be intimidating. That's what I always try to, continue saying. It may seem far-fetched, it may seem complex, but you're still able to understand it if you put the time and effort in. So this will be the last question. Speaking of Gen Z, what advice do you have for them? What have you seen that they're doing correctly? What are you seeing that they should just stop doing? How should they progress as a generation and look forward to the future with hope rather than fear?
Yeah, I think I'm always a proponent of, hope and excitement rather than fear, so I think I definitely would come from that point, or, that particular position. My bet would be that there is something that Gen Z already has an advantage, which is that in some sense they're exposed to a lot of technology, right? Right from their very existence on this planet, right? Like they have seen this right from birth. They're getting exposed to it. It's right in their hands. They live and breathe that every day. So I think I would say make use of that power of the newer technology, and many of them are also, I would say, fairly brave and fairly open-minded, where they want to go explore, right? So I would say, like, use that to your advantage. Go explore more, right? Like exploring is actually a good thing. I would even mention this in a slightly more orthogonal piece for a little bit, and then come back to your original question. When we were building out Uno, and this is a little less than like a 2-year-old company, we've grown very rapidly. We started making this very conscious decision to say, hey, when we hire the people, the smartest of people, we got to have a good mix in terms of their experience, their ages, their backgrounds, and diversity. Was a very fundamental way how we built our team. And so we did hire a lot of folks who were just really fresh out, and this was their first job, right? Like some of them exactly in this bucket that you're talking about, very young, just sort of seeing the world with very fresh eyes. Um, I think that has done wonders for us, because I think a lot of them don't come colored with old notions. They are full of energy. There's a lot of exploratory, energy out there, and they want to go learn and they want to make an impact, and they're not scared, right? And I think some of this sort of ability comes very naturally to them. So I think even in that minuscule sample set, I could say with confidence that I think there is that good power, and unleash that power. And the best way to kind of unleash that power, I think, is to just learn more, just spend time doing, spend time learning, spend time understanding. And of course, be aware, be cautious of, what the downsides of technology could be, or even the downsides of just these rapid evolution that we are all living through. But don't be scared. Like I think take it in a way where you can harness it to your benefit, right? Where you can learn things faster, where you can accelerate some of your understanding about this world, and you can ask the right questions, and kind of lead yourself ready for the future.
Beautiful way to end it. Such fantastic advice, Shashank. This was such a detailed and intriguing conversation. Where can we find you online?
Well, so there are two ways to find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, you won't find me in many other social medias, but find me on LinkedIn. My handle is Tshanky, Tshanky, or you can just look for my name up there. You're likely to find me there. Or you can go to Uno.ai. That's much easier to remember. It's a short sort of URL. That's the URL for my company. And from there you would find links, and you can probably track me down. So it's UNO, like the number one. Uno.ai. So yeah, either of those places you should be able to find me.
Fantastic. We'll put those links in the show notes. Shashank, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having it. It was wonderful.